Hello, welcome to IELTS. As you know, there are two common versions of the IELTS test, the academic version and the general training version. But actually, there are some other kinds of IELTS certificates. If you're going to study in the UK, you should learn more about the IELTS UKVI. Let's take a look at this diagram. As you can see, there are some differences between the two versions, general and academic. The reading and the writing test are going to be different, but the listening and the speaking test are going to be the same. And also, this diagram shows you the order of the tests that you will have to take. First, you will have to complete the listening test in 40 minutes, and after that, the reading test in 60 minutes. Without any break, you have to finish the writing test in 1 hour. You may take the speaking test before or after or on the same day as the day of the other three tests. It's up to your arrangement with BC or IDP. Well, there's no fail or pass in the IELTS test. What you receive is the band scores, and they range from 0 to 9. Let's take a look at the listening test. Okay, you may know that there are 40 questions in total in the listening test, and they are divided in 4 sections. In Section 1 and Section 3, you will listen to a dialogue. In Section 1, there are 2 speakers talking about a social or life situation, but in Section 3, there may be up to 4 speakers. In Section 2 and Section 4, you will listen to a monologue. That means there will be only one main speaker. You will have to listen and answer all of the 40 questions in 30 minutes, and at the end of Section 4, you will be given 10 more minutes to transfer your answers into the answer sheet. This is the question booklet. When you are listening, you'll write your answers here. But remember that what you write here is marked. At the end of Section 4, you have to transfer all of your answers here into the answer sheet, which looks like this. So be very careful when you're transferring your answers, and don't try to transfer the answers when you are listening. It's very distracting. Here are some common types of questions that you will encounter in the listening test. Now let's move on to the speaking test. There are 3 parts in the speaking test, and in total, the speaking test lasts for 11 to around 14 minutes. Part 1 is the introduction and interview, lasting for 4 to 5 minutes. Before you begin, the examiner will ask you to show your ID card or your passport to identify yourself. And then, the examiner will ask you about 3 topics, and you have to answer around 2 questions in each topic. That means, in Part 1, you must be prepared to answer around 6 to 10 or maybe more questions if your answers are too short. The questions in Part 1 are called short questions because they require short answers. But how short your answers should be, we'll talk about that later. And also remember that in Part 1, the topics asked are really familiar. They're usually about you, your friends, your family, your education or job, and something like that. Part 2 is your monologue. I mean, you will be given a cue card which looks like this. On the cue card, you can find a topic. For example, describe a teacher and 3 to 4 guiding questions. Something like where you met them, what subjects they taught, and so on. You should follow these guiding questions. because they show you the way to answer the topic, to talk about the topic. Now let's get back to what you have to do in part 2. First, the examiner will give you a cue card, and then you are given 1 minute to make an outline. It's optional. You can choose to make it or not, but it's always highly recommended to make an outline because you may forget some or all of the necessary things that you may want to talk about once you have started speaking. And the examiner will not interrupt you when you're speaking. You have to talk about this topic from 1 to 2 minutes, and at the end of your talk or when the time is over, the examiner will ask you 1 or 2 short questions that are called follow-up questions. Remember to give a very short answer to these 2 questions. Finally, you will go to part 3, which is called a two-way discussion. And once again, just like part 1, part 3 lasts for 4 to 5 minutes. And the way part 3 is conducted is quite similar to the way part 1 is done. I mean, the examiner will ask you questions and you will answer. You are not allowed to see the questions, just like in part 1. You cannot see the questions. You have to hear, listen to the questions, and answer them. There's a difference between part 1 and part 3. The questions in part 3 are called long questions because they require longer and more complicated answers. And the topic asked about in part 3 is closely related to the topic given to you in part 2. For example, in part 2, you are asked to talk about a teacher. In part 3, the possible topic will be education or something like that. It's no longer about you, it's about the society around you, for example. So some general knowledge will help in part 3.